So earlier this year, a video of acclaimed author and cultural critic Ta-Nehisi Coates speaking candidly about the process of writing did the rounds on social media. I strongly believe that writing is an act of courage. It's almost an act of physical courage, he said. You get up and you have this great idea. Maybe you were hanging out with your friends, you guys were having beers and you were talking about something. You had this idea in your head and they said, wow, that's brilliant. Someone should go and write it. You sit down to write it, and almost always what was brilliant before, when you were sitting around talking, drinking beers, is somehow not so brilliant when you go to write. It's as though you have a certain music in your head, and trying to get that music out on a page is just absolute hell. So you fail. I never really get to that perfect thing that was in my head. I always consider the entire process about failure. I think that's the main reason why most people don't write. For every artist and writer who ever felt that work was like pushing shit up a hill, which is to say, every artist and writer who ever lived, these words provided some comfort. It might seem somewhat counterintuitive to build a program launch event around the concept of failure, but tonight I really do want to celebrate failure. And ambition, of course. So 4 of our brilliant festival artists, who I would love to come up to the stage now, are going to share their tales of failed ambitions, times that they've shot for success, but have landed halfway between the gutter and the stars. Our first reader is Laura Davis, who's a stand-up comedian and television host known for her peculiar style, riding the line between charming and challenging. Recently winning awards for Best Comedy at Melbourne Fringe and Best Independent Show at Melbourne International Comedy Festival, Laura has been earning praise and acclaim for the last 8 years and toured the country with the industry's finest. Please make Laura very welcome.
Hey, yeah, good clapping. Hello. Stories of failure, that's kind of what I trade in. I've worked as a stand-up comic for the last 10 years, and there's very few stories about success that are funny. You very rarely hear comedians on stage bragging about times that they've done well, to the extent that when you're learning to do stand-up, you're basically failing at telling people about times that you failed, which is a lovely little purgatory to be stuck in for a few years before you start to get good at telling people about times that you've failed. I'm very familiar with it. I don't really want to talk about that kind of failure tonight. I want to talk more about the interminably slow, cruelly, ephemerally inching purgatory of success that we all know very well in the arts. What about when success feels like failure over 10 years? Because that's kind of where I'm at. I work full-time hours in the arts, and it brings in about a third of minimum wage. So the other hours I work in an endless parade of genuinely terrible jobs, just the ones that shouldn't exist. And I haven't experienced enough failure to properly deter me, and I've had too much success to just let me fail and be done with it. I'm stuck in that middle limbo between just enough to urge me onwards, hand to mouth and inch by inch. I've achieved a lot of success on my laptop, which I have here because I don't have enough money to buy a printer. It just says, I am successful, brackets elaborate, so allow me. I've performed corporate work at huge venues for sums of money equivalent to months at my day job. I've performed to huge crowds of thousands of people, then turned up the next day to the same venue to serve them canapes. During the Melbourne International Comedy Festival this year, I performed at Acme at Federation Square. Every night for 1 month, I got changed in one of the kitchen storerooms behind a thick velvet curtain, while people from the event catering company that I worked for changed into their aprons and set up the food on the other side of the curtain. On my media night, I knew that if my reviews came in as shit, I would just be on the other side of the curtain. I sometimes get stopped in the street to talk to my fans. When this happens at work, I get told off by my boss for putting down trays of drinks to sign autographs. I've spent over a decade holding down the same level of shit-kicking jobs that I held when I was at university because I studied an arts degree because nobody warned me. No, I mean it. You really shouldn't. You shouldn't do that. If somebody is studying an arts degree now, stop. Okay? No, I mean it. If you would like an arts degree, just say you have one. Okay? It will save you 16 grand. Just turn up to interviews looking poor and shitty, use big words like superfluous, you will be fine. Be like, yeah, you got a fucking arts degree, I bet. No one's ever going to ask you. I currently work in mass-scale corporate hospitality because it's the only job that has the flexibility to allow me to tour, maybe 10 weeks of the year. I can't legally tell you where I work, but let's just say they love a good exhibition and convention. They would almost like to think of themselves as the centre of exhibitions and conventions. And for a certain percentage of my working week, I sort forks in underground tunnels. That's my job. It's also a job. If you didn't know it's a job, it's a job. You can do it. I'm good at it. I've been there 3 years now. I'm good at it. Like, I know the forks come off a big conveyor belt and you shake them really hard until, like, the little forks, like the oyster forks and the cake forks, ping to the surface. You just fling them out. And it saves you like 20 minutes of fork sorting. So congratulations, now you've got time to do some more fork sorting. You beat the system. And they make us wear noise-cancelling earmuffs while we do it so we can't damage our hearing from the sound of the clanging forks, but I think it's just so we can't hear each other screaming, I think. If you hold a fork up to your eyes too many times, it looks like prison bars. And I can't do it much longer. I can't do it. I'm too smart to do that job. And I'm not saying that I'm better than that job. And I'm not saying that the people who do that job are stupid, okay? But what I am saying is if you got a monkey and you trained it to do my job, people would get real mad at how you're treating that monkey. They'd be real pissed off at you. We would all be here as some sort of monkey fundraiser right now. Like, monkey's got to be free, man. Monkey's got to be in the jungle, man. I want to be in the jungle, man. I'm smarter than a monkey. I don't want to get cut down by the Australian tall poppy syndrome, but I am smarter than a monkey. Put it in the papers, okay? That's how you get the job, actually. You go in and they're like, hey, are you smarter than a monkey? You're like, I don't know what kind of monkey. And they're like, well, you know there's more than one kind of monkey. You're in. Start on the spoons. You bring me a capuchin, I'll beat the shit out of it. If you don't know what a capuchin is, it's one of the world's most intelligent species of monkey, and I'm so smart they don't even know that. I can't do it. I'm overeducated for this position. How do you exist between these 2 points of knowledge? Like, on one hand, I know about a millennia of natural human history, the scale of the universe, quarks and atoms, and on the other hand, I do know that some forks are bigger than other kinds of fork. It won't be forever, I tell myself, and many other artists tell ourselves, this Sisyphean staircase of dead ends and closed doors. My friend had a government job calling up seniors to ask if their hearing aids were working all right. And if you can't see a problem with that business model, then you should go and work in government. I had a 6-month job once where I was given the sole responsibility of measuring one of the big supermarket chains, the red one. My job was to go and count the bricks in the storeroom because it would take one cleaning lady 4 seconds to clean one brick, and they wanted to know how long she had, so they had to know how many bricks they had. Fact. You also had to tally the light switches, measure the fridges, everything you can see in a Coles that's not brought into Coles that you can buy, I looked at. And despite the tedium of that job, my complaint is not with the work that I do, it's with the perpetuity of it. In just 10 years in the arts, I've watched as 250 million was cut from the arts budget. last year. And I watched last week when none of it was restored and further gouges were made not just to the arts industries but the pockets of those who purchase from them and to the education system and standards that allow people to enjoy them. My casual working rights have diminished under individual contracts and barely breathing unions. Low literacy rates among low socioeconomic demographics rob a whole sector of our population of the enjoyment and opportunities that the arts can offer to people. Childcare costs makes the arts less accessible for women, both as consumers and producers. A total lack of disabilities funding isolates another large group of people in the same way. In a notoriously underfunded and underpaid profession, young people working from working class backgrounds are less likely to be able to make the uncertain leap into professional work. There's the tall poppy syndrome in Australia that sneers towards the arts. There's a stigma that the arts is for wishy-washy sensitive types who deserve to settle alongside type B detritus in a cutthroat society. But even Hitler painted, and say what you will, he was driven. People talk about going back in time to kill Hitler. I would go back and give him an arts grant to develop new community-based work. Keep him out of trouble. But due to science and universities, also it's unlikely we'll get a time machine just in time for that. Most of the time I remember why I do it. I do it because I love it, and love ellipses reason. I don't misspeak. Love does not eclipse reason, it ellipses it. It just leaves it out like the part of a sentence that isn't important. I worked 6 months in a small mobile hot dog van in a large botanical park. For the park to claim status as a tourism business, it had to have food service 7 days a week. There was no need for this hot dog van to be there other than that. In a busy week, I would sell a hot dog. My van was set up in a field. I was the greasy deep fryer smear at the end of a long list of checks and balances. For 6 months, I stared out the window of my van into the rain and ate my weight in French fries and fairy floss, which is difficult to do considering neither food is renowned for its weight. The combination of sugar rush and 50 hours of undisturbed thinking time a week made for a pretty profound existential crisis, paid by the hour basically to wonder what the fuck are you doing with your life? I only remember one customer on a day when I was just about ready to not only give up on my career as a performer, but also maybe drive a van into a reservoir. A very old lady crossed the field in front of me, and she took a long time, as old ladies do, and she slowly got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger until she was actually quite small. And She heaved herself up on the edge of the van and she looked me in the eyes on a day where I had no idea what I was doing with my life. And she said nothing. She didn't ask about the hot dogs. Why would you? And she said, I used to be a dancer. Now I can't even get up the stairs. And then she walked away. She just had to tell us. I still don't quite believe she was real. And in that moment when I needed it, she reminded me why I do this, and forgive me for preaching to the choir why it's important for us to argue and advocate for the industry in Australia while we can still get up the stairs. Thank you very much. Have a lovely night.
I reckon there might be a bright new career for you on the Creative Victoria's speechwriting team. Thank you very much. Emma Marie Jones is a Melbourne-based poet and writer. Her short fiction, poems and essays have appeared in Spook, Seizure, The Lifted Brow, Scum, Meanjin, Chart and elsewhere. In 2015, she was shortlisted for the Scribe Non-Fiction Prize for Young Writers. Please welcome Emma Marie Jones.
Hi. One time in high school, all these girls were sitting around talking about what kind of cars their dads drove. They kept saying all these words like Lexus and Audi, Beamer and Merc. And I was like, what the fuck? I did not know if these were car breeds or models or like engine parts or what. I mean, I knew my dad's car had a CD player and a mirror in the sun flap on the passenger side. One of the girls turned to me and she was like, so does your dad drive a Beamer? And I mean, I guess I thought Beamer meant sedan. So I was like, yep, he sure does. It wasn't like I was lying because I at least kind of thought that I was telling the truth. It's more like I just didn't want to be caught out not knowing the language of my peers. the language of leather interiors and hood ornaments. When my dad came to pick me up later in his Honda Accord, my embarrassment was double. It was like, oh my God, not only does her dad not drive a Beamer, she doesn't even know what a Beamer is. For context, for high school, I went to this prestigious private all-girls college in Adelaide. Mean Girls hadn't come out yet, but I was totally living it. I had braces and an overbite and a cello and some kind of weird frizzy bowl cut that had people calling me Shaggy and offering me Scooby snacks in the corridors. I was a band geek, but I wanted the 2 Fendi purses and a silver Lexus Life so bad. I clawed at links of sameness to my classmates wherever I could get them. When my mum was like, get fucked, I'm not spending $35 on a Roxy pencil case made out of wetsuit material with a dumbass tiger on it. I got my standard issue pencil case with slots in it for letters and put in the letters ROXY. When my classmates would pull from their pockets tubes and pots of shiny gloss and apply it to their lips, I would turn my face away from view and push my own spit onto my lips and smear it around until they were just as shiny. When a classmate saw my year 11 formal dress in the window at a factory outlet store at Harbour Town and exposed my mum's thrift, I was like, oh my God, I can't believe Harbour Town stocks a knockoff of my custom gown. I feel personally victimized right now. I'm pretty sure nobody bought that though because that dress was ugly as fuck. High school was a totally huge privilege for me, and it was one that I was constantly reminded by my parents and teachers not to take for granted. Through a scholarship, I had access to an elite and very expensive private education. I was granted permission to enter into this exclusive upper crust world where it was normal to go on ski trip or have your parents rock up at lunchtime, and this actually happened, on your 16th birthday to deliver your brand new Suzuki Swift with a bow on top and stamp your little foot and be like, but Mom, I wanted a Festiva. This world would otherwise have been closed to me. I felt like this kind of weird, creepy voyeur. Nobody knew that I caught the 3:35 public transport bus home to the outer suburbs, and my parents didn't even have Foxtel. I'd been given a golden ticket, but I couldn't find a way to understand the prize that I'd won. The weirdest thing about my high school, though, was that even from 12 years of age, I was being slotted into this framework of femininity. We all were. Some of the girls were born into that shit. They slid straight out of the womb and into their Tiffany's bracelets. But it was a framework that didn't fit me, a framework that I hadn't yet learned that I could shrug off and resist. So instead, I tried my hardest to conform to it. I tried to conform to it for such a long time that even after I learned that I could defy it, it had already defined my worldview. It had become the default lens through which I viewed everything around me and through which I viewed myself. This framework is normative, problematic, and shitty. It taught me in a very surface way how to be a woman, how to be all delicate and pretty and totally marriageable, as though I was the most unruly daughter in Pride and Prejudice, and if I didn't measure the fuck up and quick, I would be stuck married to some weird, gross, distant cousin. It taught me how I should be, how I should want to be, as a woman and a person. But I didn't want to be what I was taught to want to be, and I don't want to apologize for that. The lens that I look through when I look at the world and at myself now is fluid, shifting, and excited for change. The old lens, the collegiate lens, is as stiff as a starched kilt, and yet it's still there as a foundation. How am I supposed to bridge the gap between the two? When one contradicts the other, there are these tremors at the core of my being. These tremors are unsettling, and they feel a lot like failures. All through high school, me and my girlfriends would sit on the green velvet lawn in the shade of the cloisters in our heavy pinafores, like something out of Picnic at Hanging Fucking Rock, imagining the boyfriends that we would meet really, really soon at the year 10 social, and then marry. These boyfriends would be white, rich, and about to study either law, medicine, engineering, or something to do with other people's money. They would be these tiny Scott Disics, just little flocks of them driving around in their Range Rovers and using that stocks app on the iPhone that you can't delete. They would wear heaps of Ralph Lauren polo, and they would own several pairs of boat shoes, some of which would be worn on their parents' actual boats. And we would have babies with these boys. Right now, they were just pimply dorks with braces who stood around in silent clusters on our co-ed days and looked at us, probably thinking, oh my God, ew, we're gonna have to one day impregnate those pimply dorks with braces. But it was the most inevitable thing in the world. Girls from my school married and reproduced with boys from that school, duh. In my early 20s, I chased these normative relationships, but my inner gronk just did not translate to the narrative that I was seeking to enter. I could not figure out why the boys whose dicks I sucked did not want to put me on lock. Now I understand that it's because they were seeing me through the lenses of convention and normativity that they'd been burdened with in high school. I was giving my Prince Charming a blowjob because I thought it would make him like me or whatever. But like good housewives from a college background just simply do not give blowjobs in alleyways with a cheeseburger in one hand and a scrotum in the other. That is what a dirty girl on the side would do. And so that's what I became. Time after time, my attempts at normative relationships with rich, pretty suburban boys floundered and failed. They would come to my house at 2 a.m, ping-eyed and horny, like, Emma, baby, you are my universe. And then they would stop replying to my text messages, and I would see that they had gone and found some girlfriend who wore a different kind of pearl necklace. The type of girl you can take home to your mother, you know? The type of girl who went to the tanning salon more often than I brushed my teeth. That tension still feels shitty sometimes, as though my feminism, my decision to abandon a traditional career trajectory, and my new understanding of relationships as something that can be fluid and customized are all examples of me failing the system that produced me failing at becoming the person that I was supposed to become. At the same time, I feel ashamed of that feeling of failure because I know it's a deep and problematic tie to a convention that is harmful and oppressive. Again, I'm faced with the same anxiety, the same question. How do I navigate the space between my failure to meet the framework that I was taught and the fallible framework itself? I have to keep reminding myself that it's the framework that's failing me and not the other way around. And thank fuck for that, because otherwise I might be stuck with some kind of boat shoe wearing douchebag of a husband. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rajith Savanadasa was born in Sri Lanka. He runs Open Cities Stories, a website documenting the lives of a group of asylum seekers in Melbourne. Rajith was shortlisted for the Asia Europe Foundation Short Story Prize in 2013, the Fish Publishing Short Story Prize that same year, and last year he received a Wheeler Centre Hot Desk Fellowship. His debut novel, Ruins, will be published by Hachette Australia this year. Please welcome him.
Thanks, Michaela. I was going to do this as a piece of performance art and failed to make the speech, but then I thought that might be too ambitious. So I just wrote it down. First, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're gathered. I think it's becoming increasingly important that we do so. So I'd like to pay my respects to the elders, past and present, and the elders from other communities who may be here today. When I was around 8 or 9, I submitted an essay to a Sri Lanka-wide competition. I was just a kid, so naturally, I didn't do this of my own accord. My parents pushed it, basically bringing me the forms, sitting me down and telling me what to write. So I wrote some lame, hideously sycophantic piece about our motherland, if only just to get away, to get back to playing cricket down the street. I didn't expect anything to come of it. A few weeks later, there was a call, and Ammi, my mother, answered. She came back all excited, saying that I'd won the essay competition. While I didn't quite grasp what this meant, I got it in my head that I'd get a trophy. That was important. You see, my cousin, who was supposedly a genius, had a whole stack of trophies in his room. Soon there would be proof that I was also worth something. What happened, though, was that the results of the competition were published, and it was someone else's name on the newspaper. Tati, my dad, said he'd recognized the winner's name. He was certain it was the son of a well-connected person in Colombo. He said there was definitely some funny business going on. Keen to prove he was also well-connected, Tati promised to fix the problem. The day the prize was to be handed out passed, and I barely noticed. I was much more interested in retrieving the tennis balls we smacked into the neighbors' houses than recovering that trophy. I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. A few days later, Tati came back from work, all smiles, with a trophy and a story about how the decision was reversed. The prize had to be returned to its rightful owner. Me, he said. and handed it over. It was a brass chalice mounted on a wooden pedestal. It was shiny and had a nice bit of heft to it, and it looked cool on my shelf. But very quickly I realized something was amiss. Why wasn't there anything in the papers about it? And wasn't my name supposed to be engraved on the trophy? The word ambition is derived from Latin, ambitionem. I totally Googled that. In its early form, the word had negative connotations, implying a desire for honor or a thirst for flattery. Ambitionem meant to go around, the specific example being to go around and solicit votes. So here I'm going to draw a distinction between aspiration and ambition. The urge to be known and liked is the ingredient that turns aspiration, which is the need for quiet achievement, into ambition, a desire for world domination. So when Tharthi handed the trophy over to me, what kept me from walking away content was ambition. The fact that nobody knew I won was what rankled me. Ambition continued to plague me through high school, as I choked at important moments in tennis competitions, busted knee ligaments playing rugby, and after I'd come to Australia for an education, it's what compelled me to join the professional writing course at RMIT, prompting Tharthi to say, "What about your engineering degree? Are you going to waste your honours?" I continued, doggedly, trying to be the next Arundhati Roy, only to find long-form fiction too difficult. After that, I wanted to be the next Nam Lee, but couldn't condense my ideas and perfect the art of the short story. So I attempted to be the next Lester Bangs, but got tired of going to dive bars to see laziness passed off as noise rock, and then tried to summon the spirit of David Foster Wallace. But the rejections kept flowing, and even worse, sometimes the response to my work was a complete, terrifying silence, and I thought nobody got it, that my work was too edgy, that the scene here was too lame, and white, and middle class, and conservative, that my name was too long and difficult, and I was too brown and Sri Lankan, and that nobody really wanted to read anything coming out of someone like me anyway. Exhausted, I gave up writing. Then came the breakthrough. It was when I was volunteering. The work was simple and honest, talking to vulnerable people and figuring out what they needed, often just listening. These were people who had one function for their story. It was all they could offer as recompense for services provided. It was all they had left. But it was more than that. It was also that very basic human function, the proffering of words to convey feeling. And that's all I needed to do. Simple. It's why we're here, in every sense. I'm not trying to say I've defeated or transcended ambition. Not at all. Ambition still simmers away. It still makes me want to prove I'm better than everyone else, to win at all costs, to grind my enemies into the dirt. Extreme scenarios of this kind of ambition play out on a large scale every day. The kind of ambition that leads to killing, to war, to separating people in camps, degrading and dehumanizing until they'd rather take their own lives than suffer more. I saw that tendency in myself. And so I set out to write what eventually became my novel, Ruins. If nothing else, Ruins was written to show that one man or woman was not worth more than the other. It was a way of coming to terms with my insignificance as an individual. Does that mean we shouldn't be ambitious at all? Is it evil to be ambitious? There's a lot of evidence for it, right? Here's what I propose. What we should try to do day in and day out is to try reach for the essence of ambition. And what is its essence? For me, ambition at its most basic is a need to connect and communicate, to get better at sharing that vastness inside my tiny head, to be acknowledged, and to feel a little less lonely. Last time I was in Sri Lanka, I handed a proof copy of Ruins to Tharthi. When a couple of his friends came over, they said, "We hear you've written a book. Congratulations." As for Tharthi, he read up to around the third of the way and told me, "It's good, very lively and engaging, modern." He went on to point out some mistakes, saying, "Make sure you get your editor corrected." The next thing I know, he's picked up a copy of The Revenant. I still don't know if he's finished my book. I guess I have more work to do.
Thank you. Brodie Lancaster is the editor of Film Fatales, a zine about women in cinema, as well as a senior editor at The Good Copy, a writing studio in Collingwood. She has written for Rookie, for Rolling Stone, Pitchfork, Vulture, and other publications. Her first book, a pop culture memoir called No Way, Okay, Fine, will be out next year with Hachette. Please welcome Brodie Lancaster.
I have an audio. I decided I wanted to be a filmmaker before I wrote some film reviews and realized that maybe instead of making films, I just wanted to write about them. Before all of that, I wanted to dance. I signed up for the only ballet and ballroom dance lessons offered in the town of Gympie, Queensland, where I grew up. My mum was always filled with celebration anytime I wanted to do anything besides either lay in front of the TV or put on roller skates with chunky wheels that made me tall enough to stand in front of the TV so that I could reach the VCR on top. So to encourage my new interest in being out in the world, she sewed me a leotard and tutu to wear to ballet and bought special shoes for me to wear to ballroom dancing. I went to one lesson at each, and then, as would become a theme in the first 20 years of my life, I made an excuse to quit. My reason for quitting ballroom dance lessons was that I had to partner with men whose hands were really sweaty, which was a less expensive and time-consuming alibi than the go-to stomach aches that I'd claimed to get out of my weekly trumpet lessons a few years later. Those resulted in a series of costly doctor's visits and eventually an ultrasound that produced no root cause of my mystery illness, because you can't see the fear of failure on an X-ray. Tonight, I'm supposed to talk about a time or times when striving for success didn't quite get me there, but the more I considered the times in my life where I felt like I'd failed, that impulse primarily came up because I was too afraid to actually try. The false starts that defined my childhood extracurriculars extended beyond just dance and music lessons and into projects, relationships, and ideas that barely had time to sprout in my heart before my head swooped in with its trademark blend of overthinking and fear and cut them off at the root. Until at some point, I just stopped starting. I originally wrote this speech with like a 4-minute run here about how I was inspired to face my fear of romantic rejection last year, inspired by 3 glasses of champagne, 1 joint, and an interview with Kanye West. But I had to cut it for time. So instead, I'm just going to tell you about how I just got back from a long trip around America, and 3 days into it, I started listening to a musical theatre soundtrack that has split the world in half into people who are obsessed with Hamilton and people who haven't heard about Hamilton yet. And I fall into the former category, and maybe you will too in a couple of minutes, I don't know. This musical is about the life, career, writing, relationships, and ultimately the death of founding father and Treasury Secretary Alexander Hamilton. The play, which I haven't seen, I've just listened to the soundtrack a bunch, and its songs were written by Lin-Manuel Miranda and is set in the late 1700s in New York City. The soundtrack's full of hip-hop influenced songs about wars and King George and adultery and the Constitution and pistol duels between impulsive, ambitious men, and I'm so obsessed with it. Hamilton was a gifted writer whose words took him from life as an orphan in the impoverished Caribbean to positions as general in the Revolutionary War and George Washington's right-hand man. And anyone who's listened to the soundtrack will know all this because it's in the first song. His entire life, people asked him, "Why do you write like you're running out of time?" Like, when I say he, I mean the character in the play. I don't know if people actually asked him that. I realize every time I reference him or anyone who actually existed, I'm just talking about their characters. That is a recurring refrain in the songs. He tells people in not so many words that he needs to leave something behind. He writes like he's running out of time because he is running out of time and he needs to be remembered. I've always shared that impulse. Even the diaries that I kept as a teenager are filled, when I look at them now, with manifestos and instructions for anyone who finds them after I'm gone to follow. But now that I am in the process of writing something permanent, a book that's going to exist even when I don't, the same idea that pushed Hamilton to create, I've allowed to overwhelm me. So as Michaela mentioned, I'm in the process of writing a book. It's about the world and pop culture, but it's also about myself, which is scary all on its own without taking into account the fact that I never thought I'd write a book. It was never on my 1 or 5 or 10-year plans for myself, partly because I'm an untrained writer and never think anything I do is good enough even for the ephemerality of the internet, let alone something as grand and permanent as the printed page. And I just want to make it clear that I put like wavy lines next to the words grand and permanent as the printed page. And partly because this requires such focus and deliberate effort, and as you've hopefully gathered by now, I have the type of brain that like sees the act of trying really hard, contemplates it for a second, and then just equates it with inevitable failure. In her editor's letter for Rookie magazine last month, Tavi Gevinson wrote about a moment when David Bowie was asked what he thought was the lowest depth of misery, and he replied, living in fear. Fear and how it stifles us, Tavi wrote, is so much scarier than facing the thing or sharing the thing or wearing the thing or saying the thing or being the thing. And it's true. The fear of failing that keeps/has kept/will keep me from trying is infinitely more terrifying and devastating than any pursuing of effort could ever be. And fear doesn't have to be restrictive, I've learned. John Boyega, who plays Finn in the new Star Wars trilogy, wrote on Instagram last month that the most difficult part of playing that character was ensuring that Finn was motivated by fear, not ingrained strength. Finn wasn't a born fighter or a leader, but he was terrified of the life that he left behind as a stormtrooper, and that fear was enough to propel him towards something better and safer. So after Hamilton is killed in a gun duel by his lifelong rival Aaron Burr, and I would say spoiler alert, but the spoiler happened 212 years ago in real life, so it doesn't count. His widow, Eliza, sings the musical's final song about what she did with the time in her life that her husband wasn't lucky enough to have. The song's repeated questions, who lives, who dies, who tells your story, rings out over and over, and it makes me cry every time I hear it, because that's ultimately what, without being too like preachy about writing or whatever, that's ultimately what pushes me to write, but also why I'm filled with fear over not doing enough or doing it well, and why the failure of not trying burns right down into my bones, because it's up to me to write my story, but there's not enough time to be scared. So I'm going to play a short clip now, not from that song, from one called Non-Stop, which anyone who has listened to Hamilton will know this. It comes kind of halfway in between the story after the war has been won, so America is now like a free country, but they're trying to work out like exactly what that means because they've never been their own country before. And like George Washington like led the troops to win the war, and so he's just automatically the president. And like this comes before Thomas Jefferson enters, and he comes in and is like really combative, and so that is why America now has a two-party system. I've learned so much about history. So I was listening to this song like on repeat all day, and I realized that this entire song I could have just come up and played all like 6 minutes of it, and that could have been my talk, because it's all about ambition and writing and failure and fear, and I'm just going to play like a little bit of it. So this is sung by Aaron Burr, and keep in mind they're trying to make the Constitution like a thing that people believe in.
Alexander joins forces with James Madison and John Jay to write a series of essays defending the new United States Constitution entitled The Federalist Papers. The plan was to write a total of 25 essays, the work divided evenly among the three men. In the end, they wrote 85 essays in the span of 6 months. John Jay got sick after writing 5. James Madison wrote 29. Hamilton wrote the other 51. How do you write like you're running out of time? Write day and night like you're running out of time. Every day you fight like you're running out of time. Like you're running out of time. Are you running out of time? How do you write like tomorrow won't arrive? How do you write like you needed to survive? How do you write every second you're alive? Every second you're alive. Every second you're alive.
So that's the... I realized, as I've like gotten obsessed with this and talked about it more, I've realized that people don't like musicals. So I'm sorry if that's you and that was literal torture. But so Alexander Hamilton is fearless. He's the kind of person who barrels forth with this frenetic impulse to affect his fate. He's acutely aware of his potential and can't stop pursuing and pushing. Like earlier in that song, he has this like conversation with Aaron Burr where Aaron Burr's just like, why do you need to be like the loudest guy in the room? Just like relax and like see what happens in the world, and then we can like take it from there. And he just refuses. And sometimes if you're not wired in that same way as Hamilton, if you're more like Aaron Burr, you feel like the runner-up, like failure is inevitable through no fault of your own, just because of the way that you are. Aaron Burr is the man who's saying, if there's a reason I'm still alive while everyone around me has died, I'm willing to wait for it, and he certainly felt this way. If you're someone who's happy to bend like the willow and let change come rather than actively trying to affect it, you sense the shame in that motionless waiting, and you compare yourself to the people who aren't taking it slow, who aren't considering their options as delicately as you are. The ones who are using fear to fuel them rather than hold them back seem like they're doing it right. But Burr's view of success, his approach to his work, and his perspective on his legacy, those things are no less effective than Hamilton's, as well as teaching me literally everything that I know and have just said about like the Revolutionary War in America in the 18th century, and the origins of the American banking system. Hamilton is also a lesson in the non-existence of the right way to try, and I gave all of those words a capital letter, like it's a thing. Hamilton is a musical reminder that failure is not in doing something wrong or slowly or in a different way to the super confident people around you. It's in not trying at all. It's in keeping quiet about the feelings that you have, or half-assing a dance lesson before giving up, or letting your mum pay for an ultrasound when you know there's nothing to find. It's in not caring or not bothering enough to try at all. And if you ask modern philosopher and self-love guru Kanye West, the wise man who once said, you win or you learn, sometimes failure isn't even a factor in the decision-making equation. Thank you.
I'm kind of tempted to cancel the festival now and just do 11 days of amateur Hamilton productions. Ambitious? Yes. Seriously though, over the past 9 months, I've had so much fun putting this program together. With over 60 events, 25 conference panels, and over 200 artists, there's a lot to be excited about, but I just want to quickly highlight a couple of things before we can all go and grab a drink. So our 5 ambassadors, Adam Lior, Alice Pung, Chandani Lakuj, First Dog on the Moon, and Omar Musa, represent an extraordinary range of talents and the best of writing in Australia today. It will be an enormous privilege and a delight to spend a weekend in their company at the National Writers' Conference. This year, we're hosting the natural evolution of a drunken dinner party. We're taking over one of ACME's biggest screens to hold a YouTube party. All writers know that it's not easy being green, but few are brave enough to talk about it publicly. 7 writers are going to pull up a pew in £1,000 Ben's chapel and confess to a writer's most common sin, that of envy. On the Saturday night of the festival, we're going to be taken back to the 1930s by a romantic live art collective, the Boon Companions. This completely new immersive theatrical experience is being curated by the makers of sold-out art parties I Am Woman and All We Cannot Say. Titled You Might As Well Live, this wild evening of literature, performance and dance will be set in a 1930s literary salon. For our 13th festival, we've programmed a refreshed batch of workshops, writers' night schools and masterclasses, including a food writing event at Supernormal led by writers from Gourmet Traveller and Broadsheet. For the second year running, EWF is dedicating a whole day to women in writing. A room of one's own features panels, workshops and performance, inviting inspiring women to discuss topics such as diversity in publishing, imposter syndrome, pitching and grant applications. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank the incredible EWF team, Kate Cullingham, Els Fitzgerald, Molly Lucan, Haruki Kobayashi, Lillian Birch and Matt Atkins. It has been so much fun to work alongside you every day. Thanks too to my program advisory committee for lending me your intellect and your ideas. Jackie Brown, Brodie Lancaster, Andre Dow, Hanny Rayson, Emily Zoe Baker, and Gillian Terzis. Thank you also to the many people who volunteer with us year-round, and in particular, our incredibly talented creative producers, Ella Salome, Jess Layton, Joshua Barnes, Maddie Cleve Gherkins, Vince Ruston, and Will Dawson. I'll be accepting all of your $10,000 checks for your internship after the launch. If you can't afford that, just ask your parents. I'd also like to thank our wonderful board, without whose wisdom we would not have gotten to this point. We're a small team of people, and it's only through the support of our numerous community, cultural and education program partners and our major sponsors, Monash University and Hachette Australia, that we're able to do what we do. Of course, it would also be remiss not to mention how very lucky we are to be situated within the City of Literature. to work with all the resident organisations of the Wheeler Centre, and to have such generous funding from Creative Victoria and the City of Melbourne. Finally, I'd like to thank Jackie Winter and Snip Green for designing our beautiful festival programs. So please pick up a copy of the program, go have a click around on our brand new website, which, all going well, has just rolled over, and please start booking tickets. And if you'd like to join us for a drink, we'll be at £1,000 Bend. So join me in thanking these artists and officially clapping the festival into existence.
Visit wheelercentre.com for the best in books, writing and ideas from Melbourne, Australia and the world.